Hello, this is Prairie Miller. Today we'll be hearing from the New York desk of our show, and the topic is Screening Women, Female Images Inscribed in History Through Movies. And this year has been a most surprising and welcoming period for positive female images on screen. You'll hear an interview that Marie Moore of the New York Beacon and Daily Challenge newspaper and the show and I did with award-winning British actress Sally Hawkins, delving into the striking UK Ford plant women machinists who made history in the film Made in Dagenham. Marie Moore and I met with British actress Sally Hawkins, who stars as a real-life, unassuming UK housewife and machinist at the local Ford auto plant, who rose to lead her union in the historic struggle for equal pay for women. Add to that movie title a collective biopic about the female UK Ford plant machinists who struggled for equal pay on a par with the men in the mid-20th century, and you've got one of the most inspiring, yet strangely simultaneously heartfelt and light-hearted films about the labor movement in years. Sally Hawkins is every bit an exquisitely transformative UK Norma Ray as can be as Rita O'Grady, a real-life, reticent young Dagenham working-class mother and factory drudge who finds herself, much to her surprise, thrust into a labor leadership role through sheer anger and frustration over inequitable pay and conditions to which the female machinists are subjected at that Ford plant. And while the men assemble cars for higher pay in Ford's Pleasant New facility, the 187 women are confined to a deteriorated older building, sewing car seat upholstery under a leaky roof and stripping down to their bras under literally sweltering summer sweatshop conditions. When Rita looks into upgrading the women's work classification with the compassionate support of the male union rep played by Bob Hoskins, so that they might achieve pay equity with the men, she is shocked to discover that job title has nothing to do with it, but rather that the Ford company has covertly set in place guidelines that have established women's work as less worthy, financially and otherwise, and presumably merely a source of pocket change secondary to their main vocations as housewives to supplement the salaries of their spouses. And corporations exploited this perceived threat by the male workforce as a cost-cutting measure effected by keeping female wages down, while determined resistance from both Ford and the company union leads to mobilization and strikes by the women that spread to other towns, and finally to only partial victory in pay raises. In this conversation with Sally Hawkins, she first shares thoughts on where and how such remarkable leadership arises seemingly out of nowhere.
With this, when you just want to make sure that you get the story right, and there are so many, and to get the tone right of Rita, of this girl, of this woman who is at this extraordinary, she was at the beginning of an extraordinary fight. She felt powerless, and it was that feeling of powerless that created this, so humiliating, and somebody abusing their power in that situation. And you see that every day, and I know a similar situation in my own life where I didn't step up, but it's important because it fuels the fire, and that can only be a good thing. And she realises that actually, if she didn't then, and I think that's what's so beautiful about the film. It was lovely to play, is that they were all sort of learning as they go on, and it was sort of slammed in their faces, especially Rita. She sort of propelled on this journey, and then having to think very fast on her feet, and having to hold her own, and having to find this language, and turn it sort of completely, sort of a different way of thinking and seeing, and just thinking. From the very early on, she's taken to that meeting, and nothing is pre-planned in that way, and I think that's quite important. That these women, they didn't realise that actually, how could they? they were going to have an effect. It was like wildfire as they learnt, and as their worlds expanded. So did the debate, and it went across the globe, and it was sort of having an effect in America. But yeah, I don't think they really knew. Rita was just one of the quiet ones, and I think she was picked because she was sensible. And I think what's great is that she wasn't one of the loud ones. She wasn't one of the ones that you would first think about to be pushed to the forefront. Perhaps she wouldn't have found such a powerful voice, but she does. And she knows that by the end of the film, and she's a different creature. She's learnt so much.
Have you ever had an experience in your own life where you felt you've been treated less as a woman or valued less as a woman?
I think we all come across that, whether a woman or not, that discrimination and lack of respect, whether it's in the workplace or in a personal life. But I think in the film industry, as I say that in every industry, especially I know in your industry, it's something that you come across, and that sadly men have ruled my industry for quite a long time. But I think what is important is it just happens to be about this collection of women, but it's something that affects us all as human beings. We come across that all the time, sadly, and power struggles within own relationships, personal or professional, but also in everyday life when you're getting on a bus or you do come across it, and it's when it's not talked about or not when you don't actually hold your own in that situation, when it can become corrosive. And I think that's why it's great, and you have films like this that sort of stir up those debates again and unearth those debates that it's so, when people talk about the feminist movement, that it was taken to a point, and I think, as some woman is just talking to me just now, is about young women not really knowing about these women and their stories. But I think that can be said of many women, and not just women, but many different stories and with many different lives. And I'm just rambled ridiculously.
What was your initial reaction when you saw the script, and did you feel like you had to speak to the real life character?
I did. I mean, I wanted to do that for me, and what I got from them, what sort of struck me the most, was their friendship, and how without that they wouldn't have been able to probably have as much strength as they did, and that they were all looking out for each other, and that the issues of this fight, of their fight, very particular to them, influenced their everyday life, and every single one of them, it had a knock-on effect. And that as soon as one of them started talking, they all started talking, and then Liverpool got involved, and then, like I said, it sort of globally. But yeah, it was their friendship and that close-knit thing, and they're also their humour, which struck me, and they still talk about that time. I mean, there were a few. One of them was sort of instrumental at the beginning, and there was one or two that were sort of took the fight on in the 80s, and so there were, because this fight spanned 20 years actually. They didn't get the regrade until 1982, which is quite scary. Actually, it's kind of history we can still touch. So yeah, and we're still sort of fighting issues, similar issues today. But I did want to meet them, and it was just something that I wanted to do, and but yeah, I'm so hugely grateful to them that they took that time. And I did a little visit round. I did a few trips to Dagenham, because I grew up in South East London, but I wasn't. Dagenham's very East London, and it's sort of on the outskirts, and that monolith of Ford factories still there, and it's quite sad, really.
And here's how Hawkins sees the struggles of these British blue-collar women still very much relevant today.
People are getting sparked up about it and about this film as it's being mirrored today. It's history just keeps repeating itself and keep mirrored especially in the Ford, and then in America with the car industry here, but a lot of industries. It's interesting because when you're working on something, you see everything that is sort of that speaks to you about, whether it's images or stories in the newspapers or in your own life. Everything seems reflected, and but I was very aware, and it can only be. It's just history will always be repeating itself, and until we learn from the mistakes. I just thought it was quite apt, really, and it helped me as an actor, but it's very sad. I mean, there's so many pockets in America, these tiny towns that are being destroyed by not just the car industry, but lots of industries. I mean, it's happening. It's interesting at the moment what's happening in UK, because I'm not aware of it. I mean, our whole world is being shaken, and it's been shaken for a number of years. I mean, this build-up, but there's lots of second waves and third waves of it, and I think that's why when you see real women or real people and every people we can relate to having an influence and having their voice heard, it's always inspiring to see, because that's what we go back to at times like this. We collect together, and we're strong in that, and we're strong when we're talking in that way. And there will always be greedy people, and there will always be people trying to make a lot of money. And I mean, on the financial side, again, in the UK and in America, everything is being topsy-turvy. Everything's been turned on its head, and we have to rethink the way we think and the way these industries are set up, and the fact that we're talking about it is the most important thing, because when things are clouded in secrecy, that's when the most damage is done.
Drawn into the conflict is Barbara Castle, played by Miranda Richardson. Secretary of State for Employment and Productivity, she's caught between her privileged class position of authority and, by extension, the status quo among the male political elite, and her own dormant feelings of female alienation among them as the recipient of culturally entrenched condescension. Castle switches sides to support the women and facilitate their victory, though this questionable shift in narrative emphasis downplays the fierce struggle of these women that brutally impacted every aspect of their lives and marriages, to give the dishonest impression that concessions to their demands were ultimately just handed to them by an eventually more enlightened and charitable corporation and government. And as uplifting and glowing a story as Nigel Cole's Made in Dagenham may be, the facts are quite different, and the film should in no way diminish the historical record for which so many struggled with such brave and unyielding hearts under formidable circumstances. In truth, the salaries of the women rose, but not their job title status, affecting pension and other benefits until several decades later, following a 7-week strike in 1984. And today, women workers still earn only about 77 cents of the male dollar in wages. In the meantime, Castle herself pushed for the first anti-union law since World War II, leading the way for the Heath assault on unions and eventually Thatcher's too, while the Ford Corporation, which since 1968 has ruthlessly laid off millions of workers around the world and tens of thousands in Dagenham, is praised in the film's credits as a subsequently benevolent-minded employer.